streaming at 11:30 when Jerome Powell, and he's usually very punctual, goes live to answer questions. That Q&A is going to be very, very critical. So 50 basis point for May 4th tomorrow, May the 4th be with us, has 100% certainty based on market expectations. And remember, the Federal Reserve generally likes to do roughly what the market is expecting. Now, that doesn't mean that the Fed won't bleed us out like they kind of have been the last 4 months. They will do that to reduce the wealth effect and kind of try to constrain lending and spending, which is a part of kind of like restricting an economy, right? So the stock market has sort of been a byproduct of the Federal Reserve's actions. This is pretty obvious and clear. But they don't want to shock us to the point where they freeze lending or institutions from functioning, because that's how you get things like the 2008 recession. So the meeting thereafter is the June 14th to 15th meeting, and we'll get a new summary of economic projections in that meeting as well. We will not have a new SEP, Summary of Economic Projections, during the May 4th meeting. That's actually kind of good, because in March, the last time we got the SEP, we kind of had this like sudden collapse and hard attack in the stock market when the Fed's GDP estimate came in at 2.9%, which was under the 3.5% we expected, since we've had this negative, especially since we've had this negative Q1 of GDP. So like if we get an SEP in June, we're probably going to look and go, oh my gosh, like growth is maybe only 1.5% projected by the Fed, right? That would be kind of a two-folded problem. One, it's like, oh my gosh, there is a real risk that the Fed drives us into a recession and that we don't have a soft landing. And so that SEP is going to be quite interesting. But again, we won't get that in May, so no SEP. Next economic projections will be in June. However, what we will get will probably be some form of insights into the Federal Reserve's path about continuing either doing 50 basis point hikes or going with 25 basis point hikes hereafter. At this point, again, markets are expecting a 100% chance at a 50 basis point hike tomorrow. And then now there's a range for June. There's a 4 to 40% chance, depending on what sort of expectation measure you're looking at, of a 75 basis point hike in June. That pretty much means another second 50 basis point hike is already priced in for June. And then we'll be at 75 as sort of like the upside risk for June, on top of getting an SEP in June. So, but, again, hopefully, some CPI numbers start coming in soft and we actually get a softer Fed in June. So we'll see as the data comes in. But let's stick to a little bit more of what we know. So we know that the Fed is, and they've given us this in their last minutes, that they're expecting to start phasing off the balance sheet by running off about $35 billion first. $20 trillion of treasuries, 15 of MBS, mortgage-backed securities, and then eventually increase this to $60 billion of U.S. Treasury and $35 billion of mortgage-backed securities in about 3 months. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about how I think the balance sheet is going to sort of be impacting markets here, but it's important really to see that if markets right now are pricing in 50, or 75, and then 25 basically for the rest of the year, they're doing that because the Federal Reserve and JPOW have told us we will be at 2.5% by the end of the year. Now, getting to 2.5% by the end of the year can be done in an equal path, like in 2004, which Jerome Powell first said it's going to be like 04, 17.